It really started with the people. One of those things where I was just like, oh, these people are incredibly bright, have so many interests. I just want to be around these people generally, regardless of whether I work here. Patrick was like, oh, do you want to come out flying on my plane? And I was just, I am not getting into a small plane with a person I barely know. My first day, I sit down and they tell us that they've actually chosen to go with a different partner.
Behind every breakout company that becomes an iconic and legendary company, there's someone quietly building the go-to-market engine behind the scenes.
Cristina Cordova has a rare superpower. She joins companies before the world knows their names and helps turn them into icons. She arrived at Stripe when the team was under 30 people.
Why join a company when you didn't know what an API was?
Cristina built the engine that helped Stripe scale, generating billions in revenue. On her very first day, Shopify told her they were walking away, a deal she ultimately saved, turning into one of Stripe's biggest early wins. She did it again at Notion, transforming viral buzz into a community-driven growth machine, now generating hundreds of millions in revenue. And today, she's doing it a third time at Linear, where AI is reshaping how developer tools reach customers. In this episode, you'll learn how Cristina spots breakout companies early and builds the go-to-market engine that turns them into unicorns. All right, let's get into it. Cristina, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It is a pleasure. I want to jump right in because, behind every breakout company that becomes an iconic and legendary company, there's someone quietly building the go-to-market engine behind the scenes. And at Stripe, you helped turn more of an abstract developer API into a movement that really transformed payments. And at Notion, you took a product with high virility and got it in the hands of thousands of people and created an enduring distribution engine. So curious to get your thoughts, because again and again, you've been able to bring products into the hands of users. And your fingerprints are really like on the go-to-market strategies behind a lot of products that became enduring companies. So want to start from Stripe. You joined Stripe, and I've heard you say you didn't even know what an API was when you joined, actually.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, when you joined, why join a company when you didn't know what an API was?
Yeah.
What potential did you see in it that you knew it would become this great company?
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, it really started with the people. I happened to run into Patrick Collison at a barbecue that a friend of mine was throwing with a bunch of founders. And so I run into him. He's like, oh, yeah, I work at this company called Stripe. And I'm like, okay, cool. Sounds good. Payments on the internet. I'm like, cool. And it turns out that he was living in the house that was next to the startup that I was working for at the time. So purely just because of proximity, we ended up, we're like, oh, we should grab coffee and get to know each other. And so we did that. And my decision to join Stripe really started with how amazingly smart the people behind Stripe were. Certainly starting with Patrick and then John and lots of other people that I met there over time. And it wasn't just like raw intellect or intelligence, but it was also this diversity of interests. I think Patrick was, oh, do you want to come out flying on my plane? And I was just, I am not getting into a small, plane with a person I barely know. And then I learned that he flies planes all the time and obviously is very competent and all those things where you're like, oh, wow, this is such an interest. And then you meet other people and it's very similar. So it's one of those things where I was just, oh, these people are incredibly bright, have so many interests. I kind of just want to be around these people generally, regardless of whether I work here, right?
Yeah.
And so 9 months later, I get a very serious email that's, we want you to join the company and interview, really interview, not just putzing around, having fun conversations with people on the team. And I was, okay, because I was very committed to the startup I was at the time. And from there, I started to get to know their ultimate vision for the company and what they wanted to achieve. And they had a very grand vision of building financial infrastructure for the internet. And of course, immediately, what exactly is that? Sounds really cool. And we talked a lot about who their current customers were, which were a lot of developers at startups who were implementing payments on their websites, in mobile apps, those kinds of things. And they were starting to think about, well, who else in the world accepts payments on the internet, right? There are a lot of people who don't actually know how to integrate with an API who want to accept payments. How are they going to be able to do it, right? How do they do it today? And then you realize there are all of these platforms.
A quick word from a tool that we use. Harmonic helps you spot the best startups before anyone else. We use it at GTM Fund, as do top investors at USV and Insight, and go-to-market teams at Notion and Brex. The platform tracks millions of startups and lets you search with simple filters or natural language. In seconds, you get founder backgrounds, traction, and market data all in one place. At GTM Fund, we even have a company watchlist Slack channel powered by Harmonic. Their website is harmonic.ai. Get 2 free sessions with their team to help you structure the perfect searches if you use the link in the show notes.
That enable companies to get started without necessarily having an engineer on board. So Shopify for e-commerce, or Xero or QuickBooks for invoicing. These are ways that you get paid without necessarily having to code. And it's like, well, should we be integrated with all of those tools so that wherever you get paid, whether you're building a custom integration to your website or you just want to send an invoice and, get bank payment, that should all be Stripe, right? And, well, we should go out and talk to these companies and see if they want to work with us in some shape or form. And what are their problems? And how hard is it to get set up with payments on their platform with whatever solution exists today in other competitors? And that, to me, was really exciting. I had done a lot of partnerships work prior. So I was, okay, well, I've done media partnerships. How hard could this be, right? Yeah. And then, of course, as I was interviewing, I was like, I really should look at these API docs and learn how they work and what's possible, and try to get as technical as I can be. And then, of course, after I joined, got much more technical. I was able to build a Stripe integration and all those kinds of things. But I think that was coming from a place of having worked with people who were also very interested in getting me as technical as possible. And that was another thing that I really appreciated about my experience at Stripe. There were a lot of people who were just, instead of me joining that meeting, why can't I teach you how to do this? And then you can join that meeting, and then I don't have to join it anymore, right? And so that was just another benefit of working with really great people.
That's incredible. So, you nail the interview process clearly. They bring you on, you're starting to understand and get more technical. What was the actual go-to-market motion or strategy looking at the time when you joined?
Yeah, so when I joined, everything was pretty self-serve. So you as a developer would go into the website, you'd integrate with the API, and then whenever a payment would come through, we'd take our cut, basically. And that's how we would make money. And we had maybe 1 or 2 support people on the team. So if you had an API question or something like that, you could write into support and get a response. Maybe about a month after I joined, we hired a salesperson. But, they were not responding to RFPs and, going out and doing pitches. It was more like someone writes in and is like, hey, I like Stripe. It's interesting, but I'm going to need a discount. What kind of discount could you give me? And so then you're trying to figure out your pricing model and what are your costs? And how far can you discount without going underwater? And it's actually a very complex business, so it's not easy to understand what your costs are in the same way, that maybe compute is now or other things, right? And so from that perspective, it was pretty difficult to think about what are these models, and you're making basically your best guess and coming up with the best model that you can to kind of understand your costs. And then I would say it wasn't until maybe a year or so later until we hired maybe what I would define as a real or closer to real salesperson, with a real motion of what does this look like. And I think we called everyone growth. You were on the growth team.
Right.
And then we started hiring a lot of, I would say, ex kind of consultant profiles in a lot of ways to kind of build out this team. So people who'd never really done sales or account management or some of these other things before, or maybe done it for 1 year or 2 years. And then they were joining the company. They were on the growth team, and they would, do all of these different functions, whatever was really needed for the company at the time. And then I had carved out my own area in partnerships. And so we were starting to build a lot of really fantastic partnerships with e-commerce, invoicing, booking platforms, basically going down the list of what are all the top players in the space, how do we partner with each and every one of them. How do we give them a revenue share to keep them incentivized to continue working with us?
Yeah.
And as we grow, they grow, and trying to find the right incentive structures there. And that business started to grow very significantly. And the primary rate limiter on it doing well was how many deals I could do with partners. So that was the period where I was like, maybe it's time to hire another person
Right.
And I talked to my manager at the time, who was our COO and then eventually became our chief business officer. And he was, well, I think you've been doing a good job. So, I'm going to let you hire this person and build out a team, and I think you deserve that. And, I started kind of building that team, and we kind of had the idea of people who are out going, getting new partners and people who are managing existing partners. And we built that to a pretty significant portion of Stripe's overall revenue and a really great business overall for a few years. And by that time, we had a full-fledged sales team, revenue leaders, sales managers, all those things as well. And I think our head of revenue came to me at one point and was, hey, Cristina, I'm head of revenue. Maybe it's a little weird that your team is managing a lot of what ultimately becomes revenue for the business because these partners are referring all of these merchants to us.
Right.
And I was, that's fair. And also these partnerships are becoming very, I would say, formulaic. And, what was really unique and first of a kind at the beginning is not anymore. We have a playbook, and a sales team could probably run that playbook. And so we transitioned all of those partnerships into the sales team. And I think now we call it platform partnerships within sales or something like that at Stripe. And then I started building out a number of product partnerships and kind of shifted the team more in a product direction, working very closely with PMs, engineering, those kinds of things. So yeah, that was a lot of foundational, I would say, revenue generating distribution work for the business that happened very early on.
Yeah. No, that's incredible. And you built out a ton of potential revenue and revenue that converted from pipeline to revenue through partnerships initially.
Yeah.
And I know Shopify was one of the deals that you helped bring in and partner with. I'm curious, that's such a huge brand, especially for a startup to get on board as a customer. What part of that kind of partnership deal might have almost fallen apart, or what was the hardest part about securing Shopify?
Yeah, so our initial deal with Shopify was closed before I joined, actually. But it was a very lightweight integration, I would say.
Yeah.
And then my first day, my manager was like, hey, you should come join this meeting because this is a partner you're going to manage, right?
Yeah.
And then I sit down and they tell us that they've actually chosen to go with a different partner.
Oh, no, day one.
On day one, yeah. That wasn't Stripe because they wanted to own more of the stack effectively. And we had this kind of like very lightweight solution, and they wanted to own more of the experience because they thought that would be better ultimately for their customer. And so I was like, well, this isn't the best, first day for me, but hopefully we can figure this out. And then it was a critical time in the company. We were maybe, we were less than 30 people. And we had to decide, okay, do we try to save this, right? Is this salvageable first? And then what would it require us to build in order to save it? And that would basically be a whole new set of APIs that would enable them to control more of the experience and then offer that to their customers. And then, what would the business model look like? What would the structure be? And do we think that we want to not build all these other things that we had planned to build and do this instead? And that probably, that was probably a third of the engineering team or something like that in terms of what it would require. And so it was pretty significant for us. And we ultimately made the decision that they were an important enough partner that we should go and do that. But it's easy to look back and say, yes, that was, of course, the obvious right decision to do that and eventually win them back over and have them terminate this, relationship that never went anywhere with the other partner. But at the time, Shopify was maybe, I want to say 40 people or something, 50 people, and we were 30 people. It wasn't like we were partnering with some huge organization with this huge opportunity.
Yeah.
So it wasn't as obvious at the time that you should throw off your whole roadmap basically for another startup. And I think in hindsight, the choice was made primarily because we believed in Shopify's vision for the world and what they were trying to do. And we felt that ultimately they're asking for this because they're super innovative and they want to build the best product. But maybe other companies in the world are also going to want the same thing eventually. And maybe they're just on the bleeding edge of this.
Right.
And eventually other people will want access to this too. So this won't be just a custom one-off thing that we're doing for Shopify, but also something that we're doing for other partners as well. And that was really, I think, the key part of it. And then also understanding that they were growing fast. And we were also growing fast. But I think a lot of times you look at partnerships and you're like, we should go after this partner that's huge and could bring a lot to our business. But often that kind of partner is going to want to push you around and want to have a deal where, they have the best possible outcome and you're kind of like riding along. And in a lot of ways, partnering with smaller companies can be far easier. And I think I've also taken that approach at Linear. We've worked with a lot of what I would define as like other fast-moving startups, and that's been really fantastic for us. But, I think in another world, would it make sense to partner with a really big company? I think you have to make sure that the like incentives are really there and that it makes sense. But I definitely think that was a key and critical partnership that transformed the business, not just because we won Shopify and continued to keep it, but also what it did for a lot of other partners eventually down the road.
Very cool. It sounds like just taking a first principles approach to partnerships where you're not necessarily looking at the brand size, but really looking at the vision, the alignment, the mission at the core, and then choosing your partners based on that. Cool.
Yes, exactly.
And shifting to Notion, which you later joined, Notion was blowing up when you joined. What was kind of the key growth unlock for the distribution engine at Notion?
Yeah, I mean, I think the team at Notion had done a lot of really fantastic work early on to build a really strong community around the product. And I hadn't really seen a community-driven growth strategy in previous companies. A lot of people like Stripe and would say great things about it and love the product and that kind of stuff, but they didn't necessarily have skin in the game in the same way that Notion's community did. So very early on, the product was available for consumers to use and also for businesses. And so one of the, I think, key decisions for the company was, are we a consumer business? Are we a B2B company?
Right.
What are we? And ultimately deciding that we should make the consumer business free, which was a decision we made while I was there, so that more people got to experience what Notion was. And then a lot of the people who could experience it as an individual, you're planning your wedding in Notion or doing so many other things, that you then start to say, oh, could I use this at work? Or what are the great use cases that, might exist in my professional life beyond my personal life? So you had a lot of like what I would call it maybe like really indie professional people who were consultants or in the arts or creative, world that started using Notion as their portfolio and also how they would do all of their project management for their individual work.
Yeah.
Things like that I think were really critical to build a lot of fanfare. And then we hired people early on who invested deeply in building a community. So let's get these people together virtually or in person. Let's send them swag. Let's create this ambassador program so that people who want to do Notion meetups or things like that can actually do that.
Yeah.
Let's give them early beta access to a lot of our features so that they feel they're on the inside and get access to things earlier than others. And also it's a great way to get product feedback.
Yeah.
So all those things I would say were key components of building a community around the product. And a lot of those people ended up building careers around Notion. So
Truly.
They created like Notion templates and then would sell them.
Yes.
And have a great business. A lot of them became Notion consultants. So working with companies on how to set up their Notion workspaces, things like that, and making a lot of money doing that. So the community started to become very financially incentivized to see Notion succeed. And creating YouTube videos, doing a lot of other things that we didn't pay them to do those things, but they would make money in other ways off of that. And it was at the same time very beneficial to us because we didn't have to create all of this educational content and stuff like that. They get to it. And I think that was like a model that I had never really seen before. And I give a lot of credit to Camille and a lot of early people on our team who invested deeply in that kind of strategy.
Super cool. And you guys were, one of the first really creating that community-driven strategy at such a depth. I think that's a huge differentiator. Now you see it way more commonly, especially for PLG companies, but you were really trailblazing that model.
Yeah, totally. I think Figma was another company that did it very similarly. I think when you have an audience that's very creative, that becomes a natural part of like kind of evangelizing within that community in a way.
And it's cool to see little parts of your playbook at Notion now applied to other companies. Like even the animation designer that you guys had behind it. You can see that Clay now has an animation designer.
Oh, yeah.
And it just brings
Someone
so much
who just,
delight.
Like, who just does like clay stuff all day. And you're just, this is wild. And I think a lot of it, maybe you think about it as, this like fun, quirky one-off job, but it's also about brand, right? And how you see the brand and how you choose to invest in the brand. And I think to me, that's always been a great sign of a business that really cares about building for the long term. Mm-hmm. I think at Stripe, we cared a lot about the brand early on. We're very responsive to customer feedback, things like that. And we invested a lot in design, which some people interpreted as marketing, but I actually think it was design.
True
design. And I think the founders cared a lot about that. Even though they weren't necessarily designers, they hired really fantastic designers and product-minded people to work on the website and the brand and those kinds of things. And then Notion obviously took a very different shape in hiring an illustrator very early on, which was fantastic. At Linear, our CEO is a designer, so it's really at the core of what we do. But our brand is also very different. We have a much more professional brand, and it's very clean, very sleek, minimal color. So it's just in a lot of ways very different. But when you see something and does that feel linear or does it not feel like linear? And to me, that's like having a brand. You have a direction where people can go, but also know where they shouldn't go or where that's too far. And investing in that early has always been very attractive to me as an employee because I know that these are founders who want to invest in the long term and be patient about building things that take time. And I think building a brand is part of that.
Absolutely. There's a saying that I love and I think about all the time with companies that invest in brand, and it's people impute the quality of your product from the quality of your design. Mm-hmm. And everything we do now, I always think about that quote, regardless if it's a small tweak on the website or if it's a brand guideline, whatever it is.
Yes. Yeah.
So it sounds like what I kind of heard you say was one of the things that you look for, whether intentionally or not, but a good sign is a founder that really leans into building brand because it is a long-term investment. Are there other things that you look for other than being whisked away in a plane up top and an airline, but overall curiosities, it sounds like investing in long-term durable solutions? Are there other things you look for in a team?
So I would just say like talented in lots of ways that I am not.
Yin and yang.
Part of it.
Yeah,
Exactly. It's like I want a founding team to have a lot of skills that they can bring to the table, but skills that I can observe are not my skills, but I can still understand that it's exceptional. There are people that you can observe and you're just like, oh yeah, that's an engineer. And then when you've been working in this industry long enough, you can tell the difference, even if you're not an engineer, between someone who's good and someone who's great. And sometimes that might be in domains that are outside of what you would think, like an engineer interacting with a customer and trying to understand their technical feedback and how to fix it.
Yeah.
That's an interaction that you can observe as someone who's not necessarily technical to understand if they're truly great at what they do. So there's a lot that I think about when I think about founders where it's, okay, if you're a designer, I want you to be one of the best designers in the world. If you're an engineer, I want you to be one of the best engineers in the world. And I think it's important that as founders, you are bringing the best of the best to the table because it also helps you recruit so many other really fantastic people too, because you know what to look for as someone who's great in whatever domain that might be. And then at the same time, I think in a lot of ways, you are looking for exceptional people even in other domains that you are not familiar with. So, as an early stage company, you do a lot of first of hiring. You're hiring your first people ops person and your first recruiter and your first salesperson. And as a technical founder, you may not know a lot about those domains or understand what's the difference between good and great. But I tend to find that if you are exceptional at something yourself, you are better at kind of trying to spot that exceptionalism in other people. So that's definitely a key component of it. And then I would say from a business standpoint as a whole, I've generally joined companies that are post having some kind of product in the market.
Yeah.
So I try to look for a lot of signs that that product is doing well in the market. It doesn't have to be doing amazingly well, right? And also your interpretation of that on the outside is limited given the data that you have. But I love products that people love so much that they want to talk about them somewhere on the internet, right? So with Stripe, it was like people talking about Stripe on Hacker News, and I would search for people posting about it and what are people saying, right? Because I was not a customer of Stripe. I don't know, is this really a great product, right? So I would go talk to people that I knew who were early stage startup people. And I would say, what are you using for payments? Oh, you're using Stripe. Why did you choose that? Do you like it? You know, like those kinds of things to try and understand why they made certain decisions.
Yeah.
And then for Notion, a lot of my perspective was on Twitter. Like, what are people saying about this product, right? Do they like it? Do they love it? Is it controversial? You know, why? Linear was very similar. Like, where can I find this product's audience? And then what is the audience saying about the product?
Yeah.
And I think that can be very helpful to understand, is this a beloved product? Even if the audience is small, right?
Yeah.
And that matters a lot to me because, you know, for the most part, you know, I've managed literally every type of function, engineering, product management, business, revenue, all these things. But generally, I am not hands-on building the product. And so I would love to see that there's evidence that the people who are hands-on building the product are listening to customers, know what customers want, and that whatever they have built so far is resonating with those customers. And then I think what you tend to see is that people who are maybe detractors or don't believe in the brand might just be bigger companies, right? That are, oh yeah, like Stripe, that's for startups. You know, that's what people would say in the early days when they were like, yeah, that's probably not going anywhere. And then you realize that like every company starts out with some kind of wedge in the market that they're focused on. And then eventually over time, if they're successful, they're able to kind of grow that wedge and own a bigger share of the pie. And for every company I've been part of that's done B2B, it's been starting with startups and early stage companies and then going to growth stage companies and mid-market and then going to enterprise.
Right.
So yes, the enterprise companies really early on are going to be like, oh, you're small. No one's going to use you, like that kind of thing. And then you're just going to change that company's mind. And it might take you a decade, but you can do it, right?
Yeah.
But you should be resonating really well within that wedge that you have defined is working really well. So those are the things I try to like suss out. It's really people and like, is the product resonating in the market that you are really focused on at this particular moment in time? But sometimes, obviously, when you're looking at a pre-product company, it's really just the team.
Yeah.
And that's all you've got, right? And so figuring out what are the data points that you do have and do you find that the company is exceptional in one of team, market, product areas? And ideally, it's all three. And you have a transformational business in front of you. So
super cool. It's really interesting to hear you actually articulate that because it mirrors exactly how we evaluate startups too and founders. It really is, you know, two of the core areas I heard you say was around the person. We think about that as spikiness.
Yep.
You know, one of the founders we invested in was the largest creator of a Minecraft server.
Oh, wow.
Super niche and random. But he was so passionate about this idea that he pursued it. Same kind of thing of, you know, what are people excellent at and what are they pursuing? And then similarly with the beloved customers and just people being huge raving fans of a product, we look for, you know, people that would essentially be so unhappy if the product was taken away from them. We'd look at that over revenue any day.
Yeah.
Or most days, I shouldn't say any day.
Yeah.
But most days, you know, we'd rather have 10 happy design partners that are paying a tiny, tiny fraction over, you know, $500,000 of revenue if they're more disparate logos sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the same principles I heard you say.
Yeah. I like what you mentioned around the Minecraft thing. It's like, to me, it's like, I want to see someone who's exceptional at something because then I know that like when they make this transition to being a founder, they're going to want to be exceptional at that too, right? So whether it's craft or, I don't know, taekwondo or your IMO gold, or those are the more classic, closer to engineering type things. But
I didn't know taekwondo was so engineering focused.
less so that, more the IMO gold folks, but, or those people who do like, what is it, like quiz bowl or things like that, right? These like competition, mathy style things, probably closer to engineering, and then maybe a good founder. Like, you'll see. But you want people to be good at something. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to build something exceptional. So having someone who's been exceptional at something, whatever it might be, is also a really good sign. Definitely. Like you see this even about sales leaders. So many of them are athletes, at college level athletes going straight into sales. And it's like, well, yeah, if you are someone who has experience grinding it out and like college athletics, you're probably going to be able to pick up the phone, make a lot of phone calls, be relatively personable, and close some deals, right?
And you're used to rejection.
Right, exactly. So things that where you're just kind of like, what's the corollary for what this person has done historically, and does that translate to this new field? Whether it's being a founder or being an operational leader or what have you. I think the interesting thing about startups is that we're all doing things that we have no business doing. I've never been a COO until now. So, you could argue, what business do I have doing this job, right? I had never worked at a startup, until I had, right? So we're all doing these things, I think, for the first time. And anyone who's building a company is building a company in that specific market for the specific customer, for the very first time. So we're all doing something that we don't necessarily have experience in. And it's important to think about, A, what are the things that I do bring to the table that are going to help me adjust to this problem and how to solve it? And then are there examples that exist elsewhere that I can learn from? I think the Stripe founders, one of the things they're really great at is just bringing in this growth mindset to everything that they're doing. There were times when we were doing company planning early on, and they were like, Cristina, could you maybe go off and have some conversations with some other people at bigger companies about how they do planning, and then bring those learnings back to us? And so I went and I did that, and I talked to execs at Amazon, at Meta, at Google, several places, and tried to understand how they did planning, and then what, if anything, could translate to Stripe of 500 people, I think, at the time, right? And at the same time realizing that Stripe was a very first principles oriented company that wasn't just going to say, oh, well, Google plans this way, so we should plan this way too. Because, is that what makes Google a great business, how they do operational planning? I don't know, but it may not be, right?
Right. Or it could be unique to them in a certain way.
Right, yeah. And so, like, is the fit there for your business, like, from this advice that you're getting? And trying to understand if it really applies to you. And then understanding, is what makes this business great, like this particular thing? Or actually, is it these other things that they're really good at? And the operational planning could be terrible, and it wouldn't really matter.
Right.
So.
Hey, one quick thing. If you like what you're hearing here, you should check out the Product Market Fit Show hosted by Pablo Srugo of Mistral VC, where top founders share exactly how they found product market fit. It's one of the best podcasts for early stage founders going from 0 to 1. Just search the Product Market Fit Show or check the show notes.
Very cool. And what about the operator side? Because you yourself, you've been, one of the first business hires for companies multiple times. You assess founders in a certain framework like we talked about. Does the same framework apply to operators when you hire? Because I've heard you say, be the person that builds without being asked to.
Yeah. I think it depends, like, if you're talking about, like, leadership specifically, so some kind of, like, operational leader within a company, I definitely think I've always appreciated people who have a more, like, entrepreneurial mindset. So founder mode obviously being a thing, but I don't think that solely applies to founders. I definitely think it applies to people who are leading in companies. And I think that's because the mode that it requires of you at a certain stage and size, which is like, I have never joined a company outside my first job straight out of college with more than 40 people, right? Yeah. So I've always been very attracted to companies of a certain size and growing with them over time. Stripe was 3,000 people when I left. But I think in a lot of ways, starting with companies that are really small, you're looking for people who can see problems and want to fix them, or see an opportunity and want to go out and get it. And I think for a lot of people, maybe in more traditional environments, are waiting to be told what to do and are waiting to be, oh, what strategy is Cristina going to give me that
Blueprint.
tells me what I should do this month? And it's like, no. I'm hiring you because I think you can come up with a strategy, right? Yeah. And, the difference between a really great leadership hire and a not so great leadership hire is someone who's coming to you and saying, hey, Cristina, I think we should change pricing at Linear, right? Or I think we should build out our EMEA team. Or I think we should do this. And I'm like, this is a great idea. Let's have a conversation about it, right?
Yeah.
Versus me having to go to them and necessarily say all of those things. Of course, there are going to be things that I have ideas about, and that's why I was hired, right? And bring that to the table. But I do think I expect that leaders that I hire are going to not just think about what are the things that we should be doing at certain stages or size of business. Because there are things that are pretty normal, like, okay, at this stage we should start having audited financials and we should get a finance person and we should, that's very classic. Not necessarily innovative or going to transform the business though, right?
Yeah.
So if you're going to spend time, coming up with ideas, I'd rather it be on the latter rather than on the stuff that, yes, we're going to have to do that at some point and reasonable, yes, we can do that now.
Yeah.
But coming and saying, what are the things that we're going to do that can markedly change the trajectory of what we're doing, I think is really important, and hiring people that you think can do that. But that's not true of all functions. Some functions, the job is to keep the lights on and keep things moving and trains running on time and things like that, right?
True.
But I would say that for a lot of roles where you can make a transformative impact for the business, the job of leadership is to really think through how that business can transform and then have the power to go and execute against it. Because ideas are great. We all have lots of ideas. But if you can't execute and get it done, the ideas don't go anywhere. And so for me, I've always been a much more execution-oriented person. I really like doing things. I like getting things done. I like making progress. But that can't come at the cost of thinking strategically and trying to do new things and being innovative.
Yeah. That makes sense. And I mean, you mentioned you've scaled from less than 40 people to thousands of people in organizations. And you've seen billion-dollar go-to-market, and you've seen it built from scratch. Yeah. What are you doing now at Linear that you're restarting that build process?
I think there are definitely lessons I've learned. At Stripe at the early days, I think there was a lot of fear of salespeople. As if the salesperson that we would hire would be the person who's trying to sell you something that you don't need and all those kinds of things. And it was you can find salespeople who know sales and can do it well without coming across in this particular way.
For sure.
And so realizing that at early stage companies, the vibes are important. And if the founders suss out that we're hiring salespeople with the wrong vibes, it's not going to work. But knowing that I'd rather save us a lot of time and instead of hiring people who don't necessarily have sales experience, hire people who are experienced in sales, but have done a lot of technical selling.
Yeah.
So selling to a buyer who is in engineering, product, and design. And we almost exclusively hire salespeople with those backgrounds, specifically because I know that they have to come across in a certain way to not be salesy,
right.
Traditionally. And that has saved us a lot of time that I think was wasted, at Stripe to kind of figure out, how do we sell? What is the strategy here? What is the approach? And cut through some of that initial work and get straight to what is the value that we're providing and how do we talk about it and what is the sales narrative, and then finding a team that understands how to operate. At Stripe, we didn't have individual quotas until maybe I left the company. So and I was yeah. So I think by the time I left, we had team quotas. We were slowly getting there because it wasn't necessarily a traditional sales team, right? And when I joined Linear, we had our head of sales and one salesperson. And when we hired that one salesperson, he had a quota from day one. So just things like that, where I think having that structure can be really helpful. In other businesses where you don't understand your business model, you don't understand your pricing, and some of those things were true of Stripe at the time, you're like, maybe we shouldn't have a quota because I don't want to incentivize the wrong behaviors and end up screwing up the business, right?
Yeah.
But I think when you have a pretty firm sense of what your costs are, and we're in some ways traditional SaaS, right? Seat-based selling. So it is a little bit more structured and easier to understand and easier to model. So there are definitely lessons I've taken away that have been more of that shape. But I would say my biggest lesson historically has been knowing that at the end of the day, the judge on whether you're doing a good job is, do the founders want to keep you around? Like as an executive leader who's hired by founders and works for founders.
Yeah.
And there have definitely been executives I've worked with in my career where I'm just like, I just don't think this person's doing a great job. And then you realize that the reason they're still there is because the founders love them, you know? And so the founder will shuffle them around to different parts of the org and different parts of the company, even though they're not doing a great job, because they're well-liked by the founders, right?
Right.
And so I hope that I'm doing actually a good job, right?
Yeah.
Of course, that's the number one goal. But in reality, I think you have to realize that a lot of these decisions are relationship-oriented. Who stays at a company, who grows at a company, who gets the opportunity to kind of see it through for a long period of time. And I think what I've learned is just like you have to build those relationships so that you are on the same page and that you're understanding of what their priorities are and their priorities should be your priorities. And I think that's a critical component of success when you think about being an executive leader who's hired by founders. Like my job is to make their lives easier and better. And I would hope that at any point they say, I'm so thankful we hired Cristina because I don't have to do this anymore, or because now this is going so much better, or all of these things. I want that to be true, but it's not going to be true unless I invest in the relationship and I understand what they want.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. And let's say you're dropped into a company who is very early stage, similar to how you built Linear, Notion, Stripe. How do you assess the go-to-market? Like what would be the first things that you'd build out, just objectively, regardless of the nuances of the business, but templates, frameworks, different ways of really building out the go-to-market roadmap?
I feel like I would probably start with just getting in there and being very hands-on.
Yeah.
So are there sales calls I can join? How do I get in front of customers? How do I observe what's going on, right?
Yeah.
So really starting to understand those things I think is helpful. You know, one of the first things I did at one company I joined was like I did a ride along with our first salesperson. And I was like, can you, like I wasn't in sales, but I was like, I just want to see the pitch and understand what this is like. And I can have an interpretation on whether this is good or bad, right?
Yeah.
And then we can figure out how to kind of make progress. So I think a lot of it is just observational to kind of understand things. Like when I came into Linear, we had a head of sales. He was our one salesperson.
Yeah.
So he was both trying to build out the function and be an AE at the same time. And we talked a lot about how he wanted to build out the team and hire more people, but was feeling maybe like in a similar way to how Stripe was, some resistance to hiring salespeople from the founders.
Yeah.
Very normal. And so it's trying to understand, how does everybody feel about this, right? So talking to founders and understanding, how do you think it's going?
Yeah.
Right? You may not actually know, right? Because you're maybe potentially far removed from it, but what is actually going on here? And then being in some of those meetings and calls and understanding how they're going yourself. And then trying to match what is the interpretation that other people have about this function, and then what is your interpretation of the performance at the ground level with customers. And I really care about that first and foremost, because I would never want anyone to have a bad experience. And I think as an executive, there are so many times when bad experiences are escalated to you.
Yeah.
Oh, there were so many times when I was at other companies where it would be like, I had this terrible experience with support. Cristina, can you help me? Or things like that. And that's probably the most frustrating moment operationally as a leader, when those escalations are coming to you and you know that it is your fault as the company. So I think trying to understand that at ground level is like the first thing that's important. And then I think you have to do an exercise to understand, we did this at Stripe very early on, based on how the company is going, revenue, margins, growth rate, how do we think this business is going to grow over the next 3 months, 6 months, a year? And then how many people are we going to need to have to support this business, right? So just foundationally, like at Stripe, for example, we had all these people writing into support. We couldn't get back to them quickly enough, and the business was growing. So we need to model out how big of a hole are we going to be in where we're not going to be able to get back to people. And so how quickly do we need to hire in order to get out of that hole, right? Yeah. So understanding that first. And then I think once you're out of a hole, which sometimes you need to get yourself out of, then it's about what are the investments that we're making, right? So linear is a very self-serve business, and that's how we started. But we started to get people who are writing in to sales and saying, can I have a conversation? So then, next objective is to make sure you get back to everyone who's writing into you and that you deliver a very strong sales experience to anyone who's coming inbound. And then you're like, well, what is the opportunity of outbound, right? What could we do to grow the business faster if we are trying new things and doing things differently? And, outbound is not like, transformative. But like if you haven't done it before, yes, it is new. So what is that? How much are we going to invest in it? And then if we were to do all of the outbound in the world that we think is beneficial to the business and efficient, how big would our team be? And how much do we need to hire? So those are the things I tend to think about. It's like, is the quality there first and foremost in the experience? Because if the quality is not there, we can't build anything until we fix it. And then next, are we getting back to people fast enough? Are we filling current needs? And then what hiring do we need to do to get there? And then the last step is where do we want to invest? And how much do we want to invest and how quickly?
And you mentioned outbound, of course, and headcount and understanding the scaling process. You scaled multiple business before AI was so deeply embedded in the go-to-market motion. I'm curious, what has changed now with AI building at Linear?
Yeah. I would say the biggest change with AI has been primarily in helping determine what opportunities we go after. It has not changed fundamentally the sales experience, like the experience you have as a customer. Like you still want to talk to a human being. That human being is going to have to interpret your needs based on what you say. All of those things are as they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago. But, because we're such a heavy self-serve business, we have a lot of signups. And you have to figure out where's the needle in the haystack? Where's the big opportunity that we should be paying attention to? And it's not just, I'm going to send an email out to that inbound sign up because, I don't know, it's like Netflix or something, Right. So obvious, right? But it's like, well, is this person from this very large company who signed up for our product the right person to use our product? Or are they like an IC engineer in an org and we need to find other people within the org who also care about linear? Or find someone who's a few levels up, right? And that's going to require investment and research and a lot of tooling. And that, I think, is where AI has really come in to say, okay, what are the opportunities based on the size of this company, the person who signed up, whether they're in our ICP, all of these things should be automated so that we're spending our time crafting the right messaging to the right person within an organization and then reaching out to them in the format that we think is going to yield the best outcome. So I think that's the biggest area where things have changed for us, which has been really critical because for our business, it's not a lot of people signing up to want to talk to the sales team. Right. Because we're a very, developer-heavy business. It's much more like, how do you find the right people?
I used to test and experiment a lot with messaging. And that was a big learning is consistently, if you put a human as the outcome, it was less likely to convert. So if somebody was like, sales call, talk to a salesperson, less likely of conversion as opposed to anything unrelated to a human experience. Which is so interesting. People want to do their own research more now than ever. especially when you're looking at certain archetypes that are a little bit more hands-on and working with the product themselves, like developers.
Yeah, like our sales team, they don't even say on their LinkedIn profiles, I'm an account executive.
Right.
They say, I'm on the customer team, you know?
Yeah.
And so
Clever.
it's very much like, how can I help you? How can I be of service to you and your organization? Again, we don't want to come across like we're trying to sell you something you don't need.
Yeah.
So it's like you have problems. Like presumably you're signing up for us for a reason, right? To explore, there's a problem you want to solve, et cetera. And that's where the opportunity is. And I think coming across as someone who's going to sell you something is going to immediately land you in the spam folder, right? So sometimes even just a quick LinkedIn connection and then a 2-line message that's very friendly and open and not overly salesy is the best strategy for certain leaders that we're trying to engage with. Mm-hmm. So we found that to work particularly well for our audience in particular. And I think when you're working with an audience that like doesn't want to talk to sales, which to be fair is probably more and more people as time goes on, knowing that I think for a lot of engineers, they work in organizations where they don't have power over the tools that they use. So it's like, I'm signing up for Linear, but I don't know if I can make this happen.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I can help you, right? I can help you build a case, right? I can help you try to find the people in your organization to talk to about making this decision. I can actually connect you with 5 other people who've signed up for Linear in the last month from your organization.
Yeah.
And maybe you can band together and we can make this happen, right? So coming across in that way, I think is really important, especially when you're selling to an organization in a very wide way, right? Because we're rolling out to every engineer, PM, designer within an entire organization, right? So it's important that you build those advocates in a lot of different ways. And, there are a lot of different people who can help you in the journey. There are people who we talk to on the sales side. One of my indicators of is the sales team doing a good job is how many screenshots are they getting from their own customers, like internal Slack conversations about Linear, where someone will be like, oh, like, what about this? And someone else will be like, no, we have to use Linear.
Yeah.
And here's the reason why. And then someone else will screenshot that and send it to one of our salespeople. Like, that's a sign that you have built trust with people and that they actually want to engage with you and that you are helping them. So those are the signs for me that our motion is working well and that people are trusting the salespeople that we have on our team. And that it's not just this transactional order form, RFP filling type of role.
Yeah. I love the way you just boil it down into you have a pain, I solve your pain. Mm-hmm. Simple. And where do you find your greatest inspiration? I'm curious if there's any books that have shaped the way that you think or lead over time or other resources even.
Good question. I really like a lot of podcasts and interviews with certain people out there. But in terms of resources, I've found myself kind of going back to a couple times. Claire Hughes Johnson, who was Stripe's COO and now a corporate advisor, wrote a book called Scaling People. And it was a lot about organizational growth, like what are we doing to build the company as we are also trying to grow the business. And she wrote a really fantastic book about a lot of the things that we did at Stripe, some of which I saw firsthand, so I know those lessons, but a lot of them I didn't. And they were behind the scenes or just the thinking behind it, because also what we did at Stripe at 1,000 people doesn't necessarily apply to Linear at 100 people.
Right.
So those are the kinds of things that I think I tend to go back to and be like, what was that chapter of that book? Because I think I've hit that point in our journey where something here needs to change, right? So just kind of understanding the mental models, I think were really helpful. And then my other thing that I tend to do really often, but it's not a resource, but something that I think anyone can do, is find other people who are in your role or roles where you're coming up to speed in them. So, for example, when I joined Linear, we had leaders in some functions and didn't have leaders in other functions, so I was running those functions directly. One function I still run directly to this day is marketing. So I have several marketing leaders that I've just gotten to know at other companies, knowing that right now I don't think it's the right time for us to hire a leader. So maybe these people will be our future leaders.
You never know.
But at the same time, there's a lot that I can learn from them as I'm coming up to speed, like with my marketing leader hat on in a way. And that's really important so that I can have a lot of learnings about certain areas of the business and also what's changing. So talking to people about doing our first out-of-home campaigns and some of our first online paid advertising and different types of experiments that we've been running. A lot of those I've been running through these people. I did a call with Amanda Clayha, who was the chief commercial officer at Figma. And at the time, Linear had not a lick of swag, like nothing with our logo printed on it and stuff like that. And she was just like, you don't have swag. You have to have swag. If you go to Config, Figma's annual conference, like the biggest line in the entire conference is for swag. Like people live for it. People are going to evangelize you and wear these things. And, you know, like it's going to go so much further than you think. And so it was one of my things where I was like, maybe I should experiment with this and see if I can get people to agree to try this in a limited way. Just because she felt so strongly about it. Yeah, we did.
What did you get?
So my experiment was we were coming up on Linear's 6th anniversary as a company. So we created what I called these Linear supply kits, which was basically a Toyo steel toolbox and a bunch of things like a really nice like notebook patches that you could iron on to things.
Cool.
Pens. So just like the highest quality item in every category.
Yeah.
And connected it to this idea of like, this is your toolbox and these as a professional are your tools effectively that kind of go into the toolbox. And then we sent that to our 200 earliest paying customers and had a really nice note alongside it, and people loved it and tweeted it and like a lot of things. And because we had so many posts about it, I think people on our team were like, oh, people really like swag, you know? And I'm like, yeah, I think if you do it in a very high quality way and in a very targeted way, that could be our style, our version of doing this. We don't have to have a closet with 8 million T-shirts in there that anyone can access.
Right, or socks.
Yeah. So just find the thing that works really well for you and your company. So I think just figuring out like, you know, again, other companies are going to do things differently. If I had suggested that we launch an online store where people could buy anything from Linear, our founders would be like, okay, Cristina, you're out of here. But you know, doing something that felt really nice and custom and thoughtful.
Yeah.
To a limited number of users felt really good. And so I think it's always like, how could I take this advice and how does it apply to Linear, right? But just getting on some of those phone calls with people that you feel like did something really great, had a really fantastic experience, are doing something really great, and just using them as a sounding board when you have an idea or don't know how to do something. I have a little COO iMessage group with a few people.
Perfect.
And so when it's like, you know, you're talking about like, hey, what's comp like for this role? You know, or things like that are coming up every now and then. And they're just like small little questions. Like you just have a group to kind of ask them to, and it's really helpful.
Yeah. So build your networks, build your communities.
Yes.
And where can people find you if they want to follow along your journey or get in touch?
Let's see. I'm pretty active on Twitter. Or X, oh God, whatever people call it these days. My handle is CJC. And then, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I go to a lot of events in San Francisco, so you might find me there too. But yeah.
I know you're speaking at a couple coming up too, so I'm sure people can follow along some of your speaking engagements also, podcasts, and we'll drop your socials in the show notes too for everyone.
Awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. This has been fantastic, Cristina. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for sharing your story.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You bet. It's been a lot of fun.